I wanted to first start off by thanking you all for participating and being involved with this presentation today, Preparing a Successful Conference Proposal by Dr. Mull. We're really excited to hear from you all. She's really excited to share some of her experiences and thoughts. And as you all hear, she's all about staff development, professional development opportunities. And so this is just what we would hope to be the beginning of a lot of really great conversations. Just wanted to go over some ground rules and some procedures. If anyone has questions during the presentation, please just write in the chat or raise your hand, and I will do my best to scan through and call on you. Dr. Mull does not mind if people have questions that are relevant to that slide. And so we want to make sure that people have the space to ask those questions. I also sent out a handout about 10 minutes ago, 10, 15 minutes ago. And so if anyone did not receive it, please just feel free to hit me up in the chat privately, and I will make sure that you get it. And then from there, we really hope that you will engage. We'll have an opportunity to break out at one point. And so that'll be really helpful. So thank you, Kim. So something you all will learn about me very quickly. I am terrible at remembering to introduce myself. So please, if you ever see me in a space, remind me to introduce myself, because I would just start talking about whatever's going on. So my name is Dr. Lane Washington. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives here in the Division of Student Affairs. I think I'm on week 7. And so I'm very excited to be able to connect with you all in this forum. I'm very excited to hear and learn from Dr. Mull as well. And from there, I think that's everything in terms of the housekeeping items. Dr. Mull, do you have anything you wanted to say before we get started?
Not at all. Thanks, Lane.
Of course. So please feel free to engage. We're going to have breakout sessions where people are able to talk through some ideas. And so from there, Dr. Mull, take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining this afternoon as we talk about ways to prepare a successful conference proposal. This presentation is near and dear to me as I think about the ways in which we are really meant to tell our story and impact the field. We have currently offices that really work hands-on and do that. I look on the call right away and I see Sean and Jerry, who work day in and day out to tell the student affairs story. And I think that all of us can be individual and collective contributors to that mission at large and to what they do in their roles. So as we think about the conference space, that is one way that we really can move in pretty quickly to help with that. As I started thinking about the conferences that I've attended over the years, and the conference proposals that stand out the most, it is always those that can literally connect back to their university's mission, those who can really help to talk about how it impacts student success, and ultimately those who have a way to look forward as they think about what the impact of their research or the proposal is. And so for us, as you all are thinking about the upcoming conference season, no matter how it'll look, we know it'll look a bit different than we're traditionally used to, but how do we continue to tell the story of what we do here at UF? And again, how what we do matters to the field and the global community at large. So I think about all the ways in which currently the good things we do that perhaps is not told on our national scale. So I'm even thinking about things that we have yet to tell. COVID-19 will give us great opportunities to talk about how we managed in spaces and times that look far different than we might have imagined. So as we go forward in this world, my screen will not work forward. I want to talk about what the learning objectives are for today. Hopefully today you'll be able to identify components of a successful proposal. You'll also be able to understand the language more clearly that is utilized in conference proposals. You'll be able to develop techniques for choosing your topics related to what you're sharing, but you'll also learn the common mistakes in proposals. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to present at least 50 times at national conferences and international conferences as well. And I've also been a reviewer for both ACPA and NASPA. So thinking about the way, and my previous local association as well. So thinking about the ways and the common threads that I see throughout those proposals, I put together this presentation to talk through what I would say are some of the expectations, but then also what are some of the limitations that I've seen happen that may present itself as obstacles to being accepted. The main thing is, how do you go about actually choosing your topic? What does it take to actually say, this is what I want to talk about? What are your expertise? What are your insights? And then ultimately, how do you have the research, data, or experiences to back up what you're showing? Always remembering that your topics can literally come from anywhere. Supervisors, mentors, class, professors, work, students, community issues, social justice paradigms. What are things that are interest of you? Because typically, if you're interested in something, there will be someone else you'll find the same thing. If you look at most of your national conferences, their themes tend to range anywhere. They'll have 5 classic themes across the board, which are the objections overall of the conference, but then you'll see a lot more thematic deviations from that as well. So figuring out what it is that you do or what it is that you want to present, or what it is that you want to share, and how you might be able to come up with a path forward. Also thinking about who can you brainstorm your topic ideas. For me, it was a matter of going to my colleagues, but also going to students, asking a bit about their stories, and that helped me figure out what pieces and parts I need to tell. It also gave me the questions that I needed to ask at the end of my presentation. So what are the budding questions that I did not cover in my presentation? That was also very helpful. So being able to go to various partners and various folks who see themselves embedded in my research was also very helpful for me. Also, again, going back to not reinventing the wheel itself, I definitely tried to make sure that everything I did, there was thematic natures to it. So for me, if I found out that, I know I really care about internationalizing the student experience. That's near and dear to my heart. The reason for me is I think there are many overlays between what we do now, overlays, and then ultimately how we should be talking about student success. And I think sometimes international students fall to the wayside in that conversation because a lot of our resources focus on the largest group of students at large. But when I start seeing the parallels between perhaps first generation college students and the way international students navigate the university at times as newbies culturally in the space, it helped me to really derive what my own research topic and agenda would be in that space. Also, I tried my best not to start from scratch with regard to the topic itself, but it always came from an idea of interest. So how do you begin your reading? What are the current, and again, I think some of this comes from pop culture as well, going into just seeing what some of the trends are and seeing how things are being seen in the audiences that you want to reach out to. So for instance, if you're presenting at an ACPA, you know the ACPA has and that's the American College Personnel Association. I have to always remember, we have multiple audiences in the room. How do you talk about this more largely as far as how that looks? So who's in the room at ACPA? You have first year new professionals, you have first year graduate students, you have PhD students, you have faculty, and you have staff. Who's going to be your core audience of focus when you're drafting your proposal? Ultimately, that helps you figure out what language needs to go into the front end of that. It helps you figure out what needs to be your paradigm of research. It also helps you to figure out what level of research you need to pull into anything you're doing. It also helps to inform or start you as you create your literature review. I think the literature review for me is one of the most critical portions of it, because what I'm able to do at that point is figure out what gaps may exist in the literature, also figuring out what themes continue to emerge, because they allow me to figure out what has been covered well, but then again, what are some of the deviations that I might be able to take with my conference proposal. And then also to think about ways that you might be able to highlight the work that you're doing, but then also the organization that you're focusing on. How's your department excelling? So if you think about it, today I'm thinking more about, for instance, what Gatorwell is having to do in the midst of COVID-19. We're all having to respond to COVID in ways that, again, we never saw coming. But looking at Gatorwell in particular, I can see the fact that they've had to take the survey data to figure out how they respond to students as they return. They also have to figure out how they get students to understand the staff perspective here and vice versa, how they get students to understand what can and cannot happen in classrooms. And so thinking about ways that they might be able to tell that story about how we continue to strive for 5 in the midst of a COVID environment and new ways of thinking and doing and knowing. So for me, how does that present itself into a proposal? But then also what research captures your attention. There's a lot of research currently about health and wellness among students. So how do we tie in what we're learning from COVID into the health perspectives as we move forward? And again, allow it to divulge and kind of shift itself to be what we need it to be. Also, it comes down to what unique ways we've supported students. I want you all to think about the various ways, whether it's what you've done over the last 5 months at this point, or what you're gearing up to do as students start to return. How is that unique from what you've done previously? How does that vary as you're thinking about the colleagues you've talked to across both student affairs, the university, and beyond? How does it differ from what other folks are doing? And again, what are your current and relevant topics in the field related to perhaps health and wellness in this point? And then also, how does this differ for different campuses? The reason why that question is really critical, at most of your national conferences and local conferences, you're going to have different university or institution types in the room. So thinking about what that means and how you create a message that's able to reach across audiences without losing sight of your core message is also important. And then also, who might be a good partner for this? The easiest thing for me as I look back was knowing that my very first few presentations incorporated someone else. So it wasn't me standing there being afraid, taking the stage by myself, but figuring out how I could work across the audiences and the aisles with different colleagues to figure out how we each should contribute to making our presentation the best that it can be, and also incorporating multiple viewpoints. So what we're going to do now, so I've set up a bit here. I want you all to start thinking about this as Lane starts to tell you how we're going to pair and share in this next section.
As I mentioned previously, we had a handout go out to you about what now is about 25 minutes ago. And so we want to make sure that you all have a space to be able to really share your experiences and your ideas and things that you would hope to discuss in a presentation. And so what I'm going to do now is put you all in breakout rooms. So get your sheets ready, start thinking about what topics and how you want to answer the part 1 and 2 of those of that handout. And then we're going to spend about 5 minutes to really start focusing on what that looks like.
Okay. So as everyone has cycled back, is there anything you all would like to share from your breakout pairs? Nobody? That's fine if you don't want to. We just want to give everyone the opportunity. See something in the chat. Let's see. 5 minutes does indeed go fast. So that is true. So wanting to think about the handout that you all were given, the parent share and the breakout, as we talk through, my screen does not like me today. So part of this was to think about, as you move forward, that you can do collaboration and not isolation. Again, I mentioned early on for me, this was really helpful. Number one, it helped me to challenge some of the thoughts I had as I was building the presentation, but it also took into account the expertise of others and their viewpoints and their context, which is also really helpful as you go along. I think for those of you who are newer or those of you who prefer to work in this manner, definitely thinking about what that might mean as we're coming up on some pretty, lots of deadlines for different conferences in the near future. And again, that's local, across the state as well as national. There are definitely advantages to having a team. There's a division of work. It becomes a lot easier when you have more hands on board, as long as all those hands are moving in the same direction, because you don't want to have too many people, then all of a sudden it becomes far more disaggregated in the approach as well. But then also it allows for you to be more comfortable in the space, a wider set of knowledge and expertise at the table. And then also diversifies, as I said, your proposal with the various experiences that are brought to the table. So, and of course, the challenges that exist can be overcome if you pull in line the right people to help you move forward. So, some of the things we may be thinking of: how do you actually select a conference? These should be based upon what you know and what you bring to the table, your field as well, and then research paradigm. So thinking about what it is that you really want to accomplish. So for instance, some people are far better and want to do more in the world of quantitative data. Others want to work with qualitative data. So talking about whether you want to tell about the student or the experience or what the numbers are telling us with regard to how data works. So all those are really important. We have various fields and organizations you can work for. So you have your state organizations. We have our very own student affairs conference here. And then we also have our national conferences such as ACPA and NASPA, NERSA, and so on and so forth. Many fields also have similar conferences, which is also very helpful. For me personally, I have applied and used the same proposal for NASPA, ACPA, and ASH all at the same time, but each of those deviated to meet the scope of the actual conference that I was proposing to. So don't always think that you have to start over when you're preparing for different conferences. Figuring out how you can take your literature review and make it work for the others, and how you can take your experiences and your context and also pull that in as well. Also, always think about the conference's themes and values. A lot of times people will take what I just did and use their same proposal over and over, but they're not really thinking about how it fits into what the conference has said they're looking for. So you may have a phenomenal proposal, but it does not meet the scope that the conference is looking for, so it changes the whole impression of what you're getting. I know when I've gotten rejected from different conferences, I'm like, well, wait a minute, what did I not do? And then you read the feedback and you're like, okay, well, that explains exactly what I didn't do. So making sure you're reading all the guidelines and following it to a script, because a lot of times when folks are selecting the proposals that they're going to put forward is based upon basically a set of metrics that they're using to guide that. So there is a sheet and you get a set of scores, and that's how they grade on how they're going to move you forward. So always thinking about that. And then also thinking about what is the presentation format. I've seen some presentations who said they're going to do it in a poster presentation. That's not what's going to be accepted for the conference. So always making sure you have the actual list of different formats that's allowable for that conference, so that you don't put all your work in just to find out that your conference proposal was not viable. Also, going back to the things that are really important. So you always want to consider your audience when choosing the format. So again, if you're presenting to a group, if you're wanting your conference proposal to go to first generation college success, you don't want to create it where a group of scholars, faculty would be more likely to understand what you're saying. So making sure you're creating a format and a language system that allows you to really get your message across to the audience. Also being thoughtful about technologies that will be used. And again, this goes back to who's the audience, what you're trying to accomplish. Are you talking to a group of students who are millennials, who their chosen style of presentation looks a lot different than perhaps a faculty member who's been in the field for 40 plus years. So making sure that you're appealing to that. And then also, as you think about the conference that you're proposing, that you're trying to work with, what is their current scope? How are they on current issues? How do they look at current technologies? Because there are some conferences that tend to be more old school with regard to what they're looking for. So you're of course wanting to make sure that you're fitting in the theme and the scope and size of what that conference looks like. What type of materials will you need in advance? So are you going to do some breakout sessions like we did here? We know that some of our conferences will be online again this fall and early spring. So what does your conference proposal need to look like? What do you need to have laid out so that folks can really resonate with what you're delivering? And then here to your right, you'll see that there are multiple conferences that you can appeal to. So you have your pre-conference workshops. For me at ACPA, for the last 9 years, I've done a pre-conference workshop, which is a day-long workshop. And so I'm expected to, for 9 hours, present materials alongside a team of 4 other folks for an 8 to 9 hour workshop. And so that's really important. So we know that that has to look far different than perhaps my poster session would look at a local conference. So making sure that, again, you're appealing to conference types and program types that suit your learning style, your delivery style, that'll be really, really important as well. And then presentation proposal tips. These are really critical. These are the areas where I oftentimes see where there's a deviation from what the conference is expecting and what presenters actually deliver in their proposals. So making sure you're reading through the conference proposal guidelines. And for me, I always keep a checklist. So I'll go through and then I'll look through my proposal to make sure that everything that they've asked for is embedded in the, okay, I don't know what just happened. Yes, okay, is embedded there. So for instance, making sure that you know what the association's guiding principles are. That's really critical because what they always say, what they say in a lot of conferences is, how does this connect back to the values of the organization? How does this connect back to the conference theme? So making sure you have that as well. You want a solid foundation for your proposal's content. So it can't be all anecdote. A lot of times we want to tell our own personal stories, and that's fine when you get to the day of the proposal, or the presentation, but when you're actually building the proposal, use your data, be data-driven in your approach, and use the metrics that are expected from the conference space. You don't want to tell a story that is so you that people can't see how it relates to others. So you want to make sure that you're really following what is expected for the proposal content. Always theory and research, and then talk about how it translates into practice. For us, we are scholar practitioners, we are practitioners. And so making sure that what you put into that proposal, again, allows you to say, this is what the research tells me, and this is how, as a result of what I know, this is how we exist and how we thrive in the area of student success. Also being concise and clear. While it's always good to have some PowerPoints, things that pop out within your presentation, make sure it's concise and clear. Folks shouldn't have to go and follow your research or follow the research that you're doing in order to understand what you're trying to present. So making sure it can be read by thinking about, the reviewers can be anybody from a first year graduate student to a professor who's been in the field for 30 years. So you always want to think about it along that continuum and make sure that you can talk to both audiences depending on who gets to review your proposal. The title is really important. It sounds crazy, but a lot of times that's what the draw is. When you think about books that you read, unless someone has read it to you, or I'm sorry, has read it before you and has told you it's great, most times we're drawn to things that are visually stimulating. That's what draws you to the healthier looking fruits and vegetables in the grocery store, and that's what draws people to your conference proposal when they're looking for different things to attend and sessions to attend. So you definitely want to make sure that you give them something to give them an appetite for what you're presenting. Always making sure you're doing grammar checks. There are lots of apps now that can walk through proper grammar within your paper, because not everyone will catch. I know for me personally, if I write something, it takes me a day to go back, and that way I can actually catch my mistakes. In my world, what I wrote is what I thought I said, or what I'm thinking is what I thought I wrote, and ultimately that's not the case. So making sure you give yourself time to go back and edit yourself, and also to send it to others who might be able to help you in that space. And again, always consider how your proposal will be evaluated by the selection committee. Really important. As I mentioned earlier, you don't know whether you're going to get a first-year graduate student or a 30-year professor in whatever area. So you want to make sure your proposal is written so that either of those really do understand the heart of what you're trying to present and what you're trying to accomplish by presenting at the conference. And always know the deadlines. Deadlines tend to be pretty inflexible with conference proposals unless something happens and all of a sudden it gets shifted due to situations beyond their control. It's never about your control here. It is about those who are actually presenting the conference proposal deadline. So you have to make sure that you're following their deadlines and not yours. As a rule of thumb, I would always say leaving at least 3 days between the deadline and when you actually get it turned in. That way, if there are any technical glitches, you can go and you have time to account for that. But I'm sure some of you may be surprised, while others may not, the high volumes of presentation proposals that are really submitted within minutes of the deadline closing, which sometimes jams the system as well. And it's hard to say, well, you submitted this when in fact you've waited so long, and they tend to be less forgiving when in reality you could have looked at it a bit differently on the front end. So always making sure you know the deadlines and that you're beating the deadlines by time that allows you to breathe and correct course as needed. General outline. Most conference proposals tend to follow a pretty direct flow. So you have the title. Most will ask you for your abstract, your description of the purpose of what you're doing. They really want that to be about 50 words or less, and they tend to be very concise. They do not allow you to go over that. The system will actually freeze you out and not allow you to put any more text, or some systems will not even allow you to know that they've cut off the text. You'll still be writing, and they've actually cut it off where everything you thought you write, it actually cuts off at the last word that it said that it will allow. So if it said 50 words, you write 100, you got to the best part of your abstract and those last 50 words, it will not be counted. So you want to make sure that you strongly adhere to what those guidelines are. Also, always including the learning outcomes. That's a critical component. I mentioned earlier, sometimes people go into personal anecdote here versus learning outcomes. You definitely want to tell them what you expect that they will get out of this session. If you notice, even when we started this session, I told you what some of the things was I expected that we would learn throughout what we're doing here. Introduction, what is your related literature? So this is where you literally have one of your smaller lit reviews here. You talk about 3 to 4 pieces of how you got to your understanding or how you're actually crafting and creating your proposal. That's really critical. If this is for a peer-reviewed presentation such as ASH, you want to have your research questions. This is not always true if you're doing this for like an ACP or NASFA or NERSA. That's not the case. But in some aspects where it's peer review directly, they're going to give you written feedback at the end of your presentation or once you get back home. You definitely want to have research questions that they can speak to and respond to. Also thinking about, if needed, what is your methodology? How did you arrive to your findings? How did you decide that students were better supported by living in residence halls during COVID-19 than they were off campus? How did you get to that thought process? So it's going to be really important for you to have the ways in which what were your research methods? How did you get your participants? How you know you measure for reliability, and how is this generalizable in any fashion? So that's going to be really important. And then you want to report your results. What did you find? What we found is that X happened in the midst of this, and these are our thoughts about how we got there and why. And that's a part of your main arguments as you make them. What are the implications? So in all of this, as you're thinking about your conference proposal, it is not just talking about this is what we've done really well and this is how we've been great. That's great. But what you want to talk about is how this impacts the future moving forward. So essentially, what we found out in COVID-19 now, how will this better help us to prepare for crisis moving forward? What we learned, how do we talk about how we support students in the midst of crisis? How does this support us better as we think about how we create pathways for student success? How does this make us comprehensively excellent? So ultimately, your implications should be supported by what your proposal said it did in the beginning. This is how we move forward because of what we've learned in these spaces, because of what I've been able to see in my research, because of what I've been able to experience in all these spaces. That's why this is important to the field, and that's how this impacts the field moving forward. And then also figuring out your pathways for discussion during the presentation as well. How do you want folks to share in and ask questions? Do you do that throughout the proposal? Do you wait to the end to figure out how people, because at that point people can build more questions. Sometimes folks ask questions earlier on and then you actually talk to them and tell them the answer to it as you go along. So typically in conference proposals, you want to wait to the end to ask for questions unless it's a clarifying question. But if it's a foundational question, you want to wait to the end to allow people to weigh in that space. And then always have your references. Always have receipts. I always say your references are your receipts. How do you know what you know is true? And when I mean truth, I mean it through the lens of this is what other data and other researchers have told you. So that's going to be really critical. Again, this is not, we cannot operate from the level of anecdote here. This is all based on the idea of this is the theory into practice. So making sure you have your references and your literature review that helps support what you're talking about and your findings. And ultimately your implications.
Hey, Dr. Mull.
Yes, Lane?
So someone mentioned in the chat, they were asking about the learning outcomes piece and trying to figure out how best to create learning outcomes, some conversation around the language piece. And so something that came to mind was Bloom's taxonomy, but I was curious if you or anyone on this call had other experiences when it came to creating powerful learning outcomes that will really guide the discussion that you're planning on having.
Sean, Jerry, does anyone else want to jump in here?
We basically have a whole workshop on how to write learning outcomes. So we're happy to meet with folks. Short answer, that's a technical thing to write. Bloom's taxonomy is like one part of that, to make sure you have a measurable action verb is a big thing we see fail in learning outcomes. It says they'll know this. I'm like, yeah, but how do you know they know it? They have to be able to do something. So yeah, we can certainly work with you. There's a worksheet that we have that we can share.
And even if you notice in the front end of my presentation, typically you will say, as Sean just mentioned, they will, and I eliminated that because of the fact that you can't measure that in this space. And so here are the learning outcomes that I expect that you gather from it, but ultimately you will be able to pull from what you want to and glean it in that space. So yeah, that's definitely a space for discussion. And I'm sure Sean would be happy to have a workshop on learning outcomes development as we move forward too.
And I'm not sure if people saw this, but Bianca just put in a great resource that relates to this. So feel free to also look in the chat, and we'll try and make sure we include that after this presentation. Thank you, Bianca.
Awesome. Thank you, Bianca. Any other questions at this point? Okay. So also making sure, as I mentioned earlier, you always want to connect with the association's purpose, values, and research. This is critical because a lot of times the reviewers are those who have a close relationship with the association. These are those who feel like they resonate with what the association is doing and really are able to buy into that space. So again, you want to use current research and theory. I know that we love Chickering's vectors. I know that we do. However, there's far more relevant research at this point in life. And so making sure that while you can rely on and tie to the idea of this is how we move forward from the research, you always want to make sure you're also rooted in current research and theory, because that is the point of research and theory. It's supposed to evolve. And so making sure that what you're writing also shows an evolution of your thought, but also the thoughts and implications as we move toward the field. Also, what are their professional research competencies? I keep mentioning NASPA and ACPA because those are two of the forerunners in student affairs. And so if you look, they all have research or professional competencies in both. And so making sure that you're able to speak to what that means and how it shows up in terms of what we do, because as our national associations, they believe that they have a pretty solid foundation for how we get there. Also, you want to review the values and principles of the organization. A lot of times you'll be able to work this into your proposal as well, but making sure, again, if you don't have their competencies listed, you want to have some connection to the values and principles, because that's why they're having these conferences, to affirm while they're there in the field and ultimately to affirm our work in the field. And then also never leave out the conference themes. The conference themes are really critical. That's how they decide year by year what they're going to talk about and speak to. So you want to make sure ultimately that you're following and you have a good concept of what that means and how you might be able to work some of it into your proposal. Typically, people will work it in via their conference proposal's name. I see that a lot. Like if the conference proposal is transformation in the student experience, we could do learn, engage, transform, thrive. So you would do something along that level that allows you to really have them understand that you're hearing what they're saying, but you're also putting your own spin on it. And then you have to think about how you're going to engage your audiences. I think it's really important to consider, because if not, you will soon see people getting up, leaving from proposals, which I think is the worst thing ever. I've actually watched people get up and walk out because what they thought they were getting is not what they got when they were there. And so that's why your title matters and it has to be true to what you're doing. That's why your first 3 slides are critical. Lynn's like, yes. So that's why your first 3 slides are critical to what you're delivering. If not, you will soon see your audience start to dissipate. So you definitely want to make sure that there's truth in advertising. and truth in terms of what you're going to do there as well. Where necessary, I would also build opportunities for engagement while also allowing folks to not engage if that's not something, because some people just want to come and really just want to be sponges, right? Some folks want to come in, they just want to listen, but also you have some who really want to process in the moment. So figuring out how you can derive a setting that allows you to do the both and, but then also allow people to kind of opt out or into smaller spaces where necessary. It's difficult sometimes to manage all those perspectives, but at least giving it a thought in the front end allows you to help people feel more comfortable when they're in that space. You also might want to think about case studies. Case studies are critical because it allows you to literally lay out something that you've seen or heard and allow people to literally pick throughout it to figure out what resonates with them and again, what other things they may have done differently. Videos tend to be very popular in this day and age as well. People, you think about how much time we spend on social media, embedding some videos, a couple videos throughout your presentation, not making that the crux of your presentation, but a cornerstone of it is really important as well. And then also making sure that you find other ways to engage the audience while presenting. I think this is particularly critical now as we think about, again, over the next, I would guess and imagine the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to be in a virtual space in a lot of different ways. And so how do you continue to make it engaging? Thinking about the fact that Lane just stopped a few minutes ago and asked questions during the session, that's critical. How do you continue to allow people to feed into what you're saying, or again, ask questions as they need? Sometimes folks will not want to do it, and that's fine as well. You just continue on with the presentation, but you do always want to leave space for hands and questions that may arise. Being that is the case, are there currently any questions? I think I can see everyone on the screen. Okay. Okay. And then ultimately, again, knowing your audience is critical. Or are you talking to a group of professionals from community college whose issues may vary from that of a Research One institution? Are you talking with graduate students who are fearful in some ways of just simply being new in the space and they're trying to figure out how to navigate it? What about your mid-level student affairs professionals who know a bit about what they know? They actually know a lot about it, but again, they're still figuring out how they articulate what they've learned. Are they newer professionals? Are they senior level student affairs professionals? Whatever the case may be, making sure that you speak in a language that's relevant to the audience that you're speaking with. I always say, I think we all have multiple languages. There's ways I'll talk on this call, and then I'll have my weekly Zoom call with my girlfriends, and it's a totally different context in terms of conversations. Well, we have wine too, so that might change things a bit. But we have a totally different conversation when you're in different spaces. So making sure that your messages fit the mode for who you're speaking with during that time. And again, thinking about the audience at large for the institution type is also going to be really critical. And then you'll get feedback when you submit the proposal, if you're successfully accepted, or if you're not. Either way, take the feedback that you're receiving and making sure that you apply it as you move forward. That's going to be really critical. There are times that I've gotten feedback from one conference and the answer was, well, we have so many conference presentations, or this time this just wasn't accepted. Okay, fine. They give you feedback, you then take that feedback and then you apply it and you apply for the next conference. So knowing that because a proposal doesn't work in one space doesn't mean it's not fitting for the other. And so making sure that you're prepared to take what you already know as the frame of what you're doing, building upon the feedback that you've gotten, and then making it better as you submit it in the next space. Then also consulting with others. I believe that this is really critical because a lot of times I don't believe that anything happens well in the vacuum except things get pulled in. So you want to make sure that at times you're also allowing things to recycle and circle back through. And so it's really important that you talk to those people that you trust, but then also some people that you might not know as well from your scope, because they might give you some ideas or some input or some thoughts that were counter to what you were thinking and may allow you to also shift and pivot a bit too. And then you begin the work of editing. So the work does not end once the conference proposal has been accepted. At that point, what you want to do is really fine tune it. Typically you have a few months to do that at the very least. And so making sure you use that time for good and you really are processing that with folks too. Also doing some mock conference presentations. I'm good for doing that. Okay, I want to run through this presentation with you. Tell me what you see. Because the people who are in that space and who know what you're trying to deliver can help you figure out if you're articulating things the way that you want them to be received. So always helpful for me personally to always have a mock presentation before I actually get to the main stage, because that allows you to be able to work through things that perhaps you didn't see as you were building your presentation. And then again, I know this sounds repetitive, do not miss the deadline. You all would be surprised at how many times you get messages from people, oh, well, this happened last night and I just couldn't get it in. typically you've had a few months to get it in. And so you don't want it to be your reality that, because things do happen in life. And so if it comes down to an emergency coming up and you knew that there was a presentation that was due at 5, chances are you're not going to think about that presentation in the midst of a crisis or chaos. So making sure that as much as you can guard against the idea that you're going to run into something, submitting a bit ahead of time allows you to avoid that. And again, it takes a little bit more planning, but it's helpful down the road. And then being prepared for at least a 6-week response for in many cases or instances on your conference proposal. It's really, to me, that was some of the hardest parts. Like, okay, well, I did this. I know other people have started to get their responses. Where am I going to get mine? Typically, national conferences are 6 weeks. Local conferences tend to be 2 to 3 weeks. And then our conferences, regional, tend to be somewhere in between. So just know when you submit, it's out of your hands. The minute you hit submit, it's out of your hands for at least 3 weeks. Most times it's out of your hands for at least 6. So once it's submitted, you're good to go. And then just wait for the response in that space. And of course, good luck. Also, in the meantime, making sure that you're securing the bag. What funding do you need to present? So Tiffany, you're funny. So making sure that you actually secure the funding that's needed to get, once this is accepted. A lot of the conferences will have money that's available for you. I will say I've seen many dollars left on the table when it comes to how students, faculty, and staff secure money for these opportunities. So making sure you're looking, whether it's our department, whether it's the division, whether it's the graduate school, what are different ways that you can actually get your costs reduced? Volunteering at conferences sometimes allow them to waive your fees. Reach out to your contacts. How are you going to share resources in various ways? So making sure that in the midst of waiting to hear back, or even before you submit, making sure you have thought about different ways to actually secure funding for your opportunity. It's going to be really critical. Okay. And then also just revisiting, always incorporating theories or research into your presentation. You need a foundation of information that helps you understand the foundations of your expertise for the reviewers. They have to figure out why they should listen to you, Deandra Mull, in this capacity. You want to talk about rec sports. What experience do you have with rec sports to be able to talk about this? So you want to make sure that you absolutely have the expertise. You want to talk a bit about that when you're building the proposal. As a graduate student who's navigated X communities or navigated X field of research, this is what I bring to the table in terms of this proposal. So making sure you put a bit of your identity, again, that's not anecdotal, that's experience. So in that point, you are the research in that moment. So you're not talking about, back when I was in graduate school, this is what I observed. No, what you're saying is, as a current X person, this is how I've come to know this research. This is how my interest has grown. And this is how I think I can impact the field or the conference. So you want to make sure that you pull that in as well. And then also using relevant research. And then you want to be collaborative throughout the entire process. So are you talking with others? A lot of times you'll get presentations where they list who else will be presenting at that conference, reaching out to them. Hey, why don't you know, this is what I'm presenting on. Is there a way that I can, for my proposal or my presentation, I can tell other people, hey, this is the start of what I'm talking about. You may also want to attend X's presentation to learn more about this subject area. Number one, it's a good way to build good networks in the field. But two, it's another way to really help your audience be connected beyond just your session. So we think about the implications. Part of that may also be drawn out of the implication session. So this is what I talked about, but ultimately I know that this afternoon at 3:15, X is going to discuss this more. So you may want to attend that if you want to go further than what I'm sharing with you here and figure out ways that they've been able to actually put my theories and practice into even more practical settings. So that's also a good way to connect there. And then again, you're connecting to the conference, and then you're also making the importance of the presentation explicit. Why, when conferences are getting X amount of proposals, should they accept yours? What again is unique about what you're presenting? How does it impact the field at large? How has it impacted the students you've served? How has it impacted policies that we're trying to create? So ultimately, you always want to go back and forth between the idea of these are the implications. And so I think that's one of the biggest misses I see in proposals when I'm reviewing, is the implications are not always spelled out about why this matters and how we take it farther than just the proposal for your 45 minutes or your hour. That hour is critical to how people are going to learn more about why they should want to learn more about the areas that you're discussing, why they know about how we might want to expand upon this, and then also what are the holes that we know that your research has helped us to understand exist in the field, and how might we be able to address or speak to those. And then ultimately proofreading. Critical, critical, critical. Again, leave yourself enough time for your brain to unlearn what it thought it was writing. That's one of the biggest pieces I've also learned, is that what you think you're writing in terms of sometimes the grammatical pieces aren't always there. So allowing yourself time to come back and be almost unfamiliar with what you've written for a few days. That way you can correct for the errors. You can also use things like Grammarly or other colleagues as well, but you best know what you were attempting to articulate. So allowing yourself time to write and then be able to come back to it and address it and proofread it is going to be valuable. And then from there, you're expected to develop your presentation. Make sure that the presentation still fits your original proposal, conference, and the theme, because what you originally submit is what they're going to put in the program booklet or what they're going to tell your presenters, or I'm sorry, your attendees. And that's going to be really critical. It can't be that, oh, you know, I thought of a much better proposal, so now I'm going to shift it, and that's what I'm going to do at the conference. Nope. What you said you're going to do is what you still should do, because ultimately that's what people are coming to see. It's okay to evolve it, but make sure the basics of what you said you were going to cover does not need to shift at all. You can evolve, but there's no bait and switch here. Bait and switch will leave you with a half empty room. So making sure that you're absolutely honoring what you said you valued as you created that first proposal is going to be absolutely critical. So that brings us to the end. I know it was fast, but I did want to make sure that I left time for questions. We will also share the proposal because, again, it lists the various steps and things that you're going to want to consider as you've done this. It's fascinating because I remember going to early on when my first proposal, trying to figure out how I wrote this write a proposal as a graduate student. And I'm like, I don't think that anyone ever really broke it down, like step by step, some of the things that are going to be critical to it. So wanting to make sure that you all actually have that. And I think you think about the implications for me walking away from some of those conferences is knowing more about how we can better equip people to be successful as they're preparing their own conference proposals as well. So that was the intention here. And again, this is just the first of one of the sessions I thought was critical. If you all have heard anything about me, and Lane has mentioned early on, I'm really big on professional development, whether it's localized, whether it's statewide, whether it's regional, whether it's national. I believe that all of us need to make sure that we're able to take advantage of opportunities that come our way. And if not, we'll create them here as well. But I do believe that when we're so busy pouring into students, making sure that we're also finding ways to pour into ourselves and to grow. So I will continue to do that as a leader in the division, and making sure that I will do my best to make sure we're creating those opportunities for you as well. So thank you for your time. And this is time, if there are any questions, look, nothing in the chat now. If there are questions that you all may have, I am certainly open to answering them. We also have some of our other resident experts in this space on the call too. And so while I'm delivering the presentation, please know if you can jump in and offer insight, I really do welcome and invite you to do this.
All right, I have 3 questions for you.
Okay.
So the first question being, I'm not only interested in learning how to choose a topic, but also how to guide my staff in submitting presentations.
Yes. So I think it may be helpful to walk through some of this, and you can also take the PowerPoint that we're going to share with you and also recreate it for your particular audiences. I think that's going to be really critical. So if there are things that you know that your staff needs to learn about, or again, perhaps you're talking about graduate students, or you're talking about newer professionals who are kind of like deer in the headlights sometimes as they're thinking about developing this, making sure that you can say to them, here are the things that you can concentrate on. Let's do a mock session as you're preparing this. Why don't you send me your proposal draft a week before you submit it there, and I can give you feedback. So making sure that you're creating ways in which they can seek feedback, but then also you're creating ways in which they can also engage so that it takes some of the pressure off before they actually move into those other spaces.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, how do we collaborate with others within UF? So both in the division and then outside of the division.
So I'm actually Lane and Sean and Kim are all on the call as well. We are going to be standing up more opportunities for that to be the case here. Again, I know that COVID has kept us a little busy lately, but that is absolutely still our focus as we head into the fall. And we have a really dedicated team of folks who are wanting to create opportunities for you all to do so. So more to come. Kim, Sean, Lane, is there anything you want to offer here?
Some good progress with College of Ed in particular, some great partnerships nurturing there, and they have such a huge team of people devoted to connecting their faculty with research opportunities. So we have this untapped opportunity that they will be excited to hear about the programs you have and the access to students and information about students, and they'll bring their expertise for grant writing, for publication, for presentation to bear on your project. So yeah, more to come with that, but those partnerships are absolutely ready for the taking. Reach out to us about any ideas you have.
Awesome.
So something to add, I think sometimes when we're working on proposals, it can be a very vulnerable experience and a very vulnerable process because we're afraid that if we tell too many people that we're interested in something and it doesn't work out, then we're gonna look foolish. And so I know I felt this way before, but I also think of the mindset of closed mouths don't get fed. And so you're not gonna be able to get your ideas out there. You're not gonna be able to find out who's gonna be able to collaborate with you until you're comfortable enough being vulnerable. And so as Dr. Mull mentioned, Kim, Sean, and I are all working to try and create some staff development opportunities, but also we are all about trying to create connections. And so continue to ask each other who might be good people to collaborate with, but really be as comfortable as you can be stepping into that vulnerability will be, I think, really important.
And as I shared, not every piece of proposal I've ever submitted has been accepted, right? That's okay. I'm okay with that. You get to hit far more than you miss. And so once you get into the swing and the rhythm of this, it does become easier to figure out what they're looking for. And again, they give you a script in many ways. A lot of times when I've not been accepted, it's because I've deviated from what they literally told me they wanted me to put into the proposal. So using that to guide your frame will be really helpful.
Kim, were you about to say something?
Oh, yes, I was just going to say, I agree. And I think today, just getting started with the proposal worksheet that we were all given to at least get started thinking about some of these things. Some folks, I'm sure, had some great ideas or maybe some things that they already had in mind. Others may have been presented with this, and this is the first time they're actually starting to frame things out or think about things. So I think just continue to work on those ideas and reach out to any of us if you feel like you wish to join a group or start a group even. Zoom makes it super easy for us to connect in really exciting ways now. So one of the benefits, I suppose, of what we've had to go through, but really we can get together and just to talk and just to vet ideas or just to throw some ideas out there and see who else maybe has a similar idea and connect. So I think let's talk about those things, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
We have some more questions from the chat. How do we share when we have accepted proposals or an upcoming conference presentation to the DSA?
Tim, Lane, Sean, before I answer, I don't want to dominate this conversation, so that's why I want to defer if you all would like to answer. Okay, so we are going to be creating actually a clearinghouse of what we've done across the division as well. That's going to be really critical. Number one, it gives you all access to how the division is doing. It allows us to make sure that, again, we're being transparent in the efforts here. And so I know that Sean, of course, in the research space and the assessment space is doing that already. We also will create on Lane's end as well, as we look at what that looks like. Lane, you and I were just talking about that. Anything you want to offer or add in that space?
Yeah, so I think I love this question because I think it speaks really to the fact that UF, something that Dr. Mull mentioned earlier, that UF does incredible work. And at the same time, when we're doing this incredible work, we don't talk about it. And I know there's going to be some efforts around this branding and making sure that we're getting our voices and presence out there more. And so I think we're going to make some very strategic efforts to make sure that this is something that's presented both to the division and then also hopefully across the country, because UF does do great work. You all are doing incredible work. And I think this is a really good chance for us to really show it. And so we're going to keep working on ideas to make sure that you're being spotlighted the way that you all deserve to be.
Absolutely.
All right, I have another question for you. Well, first is, Dr. Mull, this is great content. And then they said, do you have any experience leading a webinar? If so, are there any differences for us to consider regarding the conference proposal content?
I do, and I think that it depends on the type of webinar. There are also some interactive webinars as well. But for me, the ones that I most are familiar with will have some breakout sessions within them, but typically you're delivering almost in lecture style in some ways. And so when you're building, you should be able to, you write your slides for your webinars, but then you build the content behind it. Almost think about the slide pages on a PowerPoint presentation. So you build the frame and then you build the content behind the scene, so that those who are on the front end don't see all the content. So you don't have as many talking points the way I did on this slide here for this PowerPoint, right? And so webinars look a bit different because they're more interactive between your speaking voice and people getting more of a feel for the content. But we can talk more about those as well, because I think when you're thinking about the conference proposal content, just knowing that essentially it's almost like a movie script, I guess would be the best way to have it. You have the actors on stage, you have those talking points that are bouncing, but behind the scenes where you're doing a lot of the work. So it wouldn't be that you would have all the different pieces that you would have in a traditional proposal.
Will there be an opportunity within the DSA to apply for funding if/when a proposal has been accepted?
Yes, we are literally setting aside some centralized funding. This, of course, is the worst time on earth ever, as we're in the middle of a pandemic, to look at that. But that was one of the things that I committed to coming in, is that I would look to find some funding opportunities. And so I'm still committed to that. Absolutely.
This is recorded, folks, so we've got her.
You know, that's a good point. That's a good point. No, if you know me, if I say it, I'm going to do all I can to live it out. So we are absolutely looking at that, because I know that, of course, there's funding that some of you are able to get from your divisions, from your departments and your units, but making sure that, again, where the division can step in and offer some support as well, we are committed.
What advice might you have for us that, for those who are better at pointing out presentation topics for others, but struggle to figure out what I might be really strong at when it comes to presenting?
Working with that person. So again, coaches coach and players play. So in all good presentations, you have different people who are putting that together if you're working in a group. So figuring out what your role is in that team. I was thinking about, I mentioned that I lead a pre-conference workshop every year for ACPA. This was either year 9 or 10, I don't even know anymore. But that was really critical. We do have some folks who literally are the idea generators behind the scenes. And then you have some folks who are willing to stand up and deliver the content because that's their strength as well. So working with people who play to your strengths is going to be absolutely critical in this. Not everybody on the team has to be the speaking role. Some people need to make sure that, again, they're creating the content for the proposal. So pairing with someone who can help you do the both and.
I think to add on to that, I think about how research is usually identifying gaps in already existing literature. And I think that if you're able to look at what past presentations that might have existed at that conference, but then find a way or look at the gap that might exist, you might be doing something very similar. However, maybe they haven't looked at this student group, or maybe they haven't considered this type of college or institution. I think that's another way that you can really allow your expertise to shine in a way that which it isn't copying someone else's work, but really showing that there's some gaps that have not been identified quite yet.
Absolutely.
And then Dr. Mull, as an experienced reviewer, what are some characteristics of quality proposals that have especially stood out to you?
So I'm a person who likes good movies. So I think titles matter, right? And again, I'm weird. I do choose movies based upon titles. So I will say my bias as a reviewer is titles that either tell a story in a very quick manner or connect to the conference theme, which is what you really want to do. It needs to stick out. And then also your abstract is where you get to kill it. That's important. The abstract matters. I see some people who go too in depth into the research in the abstract versus telling the story about the who, what, when, where, why. I would say using the who, what, when, where, why to build your abstract is absolutely critical. A lot of people get too far into the weeds in that abstract. The abstract is literally your 30-second soundbite. You think about a movie. You decide to see movies based upon either you've read the book or you've seen the preview. So your abstract needs to be the preview to what they're going to get from their proposal.
Something that I was thinking about it. Sorry?
I was saying, does that make sense?
You're getting a lot of head nods. So something I also think about is the opportunity for you to be interdisciplinary while also still staying true to student affairs. So I think something that I found to be really successful whenever I'm presenting is to pull in other fields, because a lot of times we are so interested in student affairs work that we sometimes forget that there are other angles that might exist in women's studies, Black studies, sociology, psychology, whatever it may be. And so if you're able to pull in that type of knowledge into your argument or your implications, it not only makes the people that are in that space more curious about it, but you're teaching them things that they never considered before, because not everyone else is going to be a content expert or maybe be engaged with that content the same way that you have become engaged with throughout the learning process. So I think also the opportunity to become interdisciplinary will maybe help you stand apart from other individuals who will stay strictly in one field.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you all once again for your time today. This has been incredible. Dr. Mull, is there anything that you wanted to say before we sign out?
No, just thank you. And please note if there are conference proposals that you all would like to have, I am more than willing to help work with you on conference proposals as well. I do like to be able to, I think it's really important for leaders, whether it's junior or senior, to live the values that we're espousing to all of you. And so making sure if there are ways that you would like for me to join on a proposal, please know that as much as I am able to do so, I fully will embrace doing so. And then also just looking forward to what all you present. But again, the thing is just putting your foot forward. Don't worry about stumbling. Know that regardless of what you put forward, you're going to learn from it and figure out how you brace it or prepare for the next time out. So again, whatever I can do to help, please let me know. Awesome. Thank you all. You actually gained back 53 minutes. So you know in student affairs, we're always happy when we gain back time. So thank you all for spending time today and looking forward to what comes next from our proposals. And we'll put some money where my mouth is. So obviously we got you covered on that too. Lynn's hand is hilarious. Lynn is quick with the reactions on this call. So thank you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.